Okay, welcome to another episode of Women Who Run with Horses podcast or Unbridled Medicine TV, depending on where you're watching this. I wanted to experiment a little bit with being able to record things for both platforms to be able to kind of share sort of the content in both ways. As part of my exploration with the Unbridled Medicine TV and having things up on my YouTube channel, I wanted to be able to speak to a couple of different topics that I kind of cover with my Women Who Run with Horses podcast, and the variety of places that I touch when I'm, I think, where I want to express and help people that are on sort of a similar path to me. And a piece of that is incorporating and speaking and sharing about some experiences that I've had with my horses, because I think the internal piece of the journey of where we hold space courageously for our purpose often is reflected in our own personal journey. And I seek those out and have those powerfully mirrored for me with my horses. And the horses are obviously a big part of how I hold space in the world and just how I navigate my own personal journey. So I wanted to share an experience and exchange I had with one of my horses and the teaching about it, because it was impactful. So last weekend, or this was, I guess, probably the first weekend of July in 2020, I had a couple of colleagues of mine come over, and we are in the process right now of starting a new business venture in the midst of COVID, which I think is amazing. And we sought out the horses. We wanted to go out and see the horses as a mirror and also a reflection of some of the things that we were journeying with. And so we entered into the field and we each sort of found our sort of spot and connection with certain horses. And I was called or drawn to one of my elder horses in my big herd, Rudy, who is a 23-year-old Oldenburg, so an ex-jumper, that was originally a border horse of mine at my old facility. And when I moved here, he became part of my herd. And he is a significant horse for me in the sense of he had to have the unfortunate job of being a messenger for me my first year at the ranch, and he trampled me. And I say unfortunate because he was a messenger, and I think that he felt really badly about running me over. It wasn't sort of an intentional thing. It was a spook accident. And the setup around the significance about the different exchange I had with him is, as I go and embark on launching a new business, and something I talked to with my partners was, it's really important for me to not repeat the old patterns and mistakes of over stressing and overworking myself, because when I got trampled my first year, the message really was, I have a default setting of becoming a workhorse, meaning that I completely ignore my own well-being and I work really, really hard. Working hard is not a problem for me. And my first year at my ranch, I worked so hard that I depleted myself and I went into adrenal fatigue, and I kept getting these signs and intuitions to stop and take a rest. And I go on a yearly trip to the island every year. And so I figured, I'll rest then. And that was probably 6 months away. And my body said, that's not good enough. And so exhaustion and depletion wasn't a good enough sign for me to take a time out. I had to literally get run over by one of my horses. I broke a collarbone and I was in forced rest for about 2 weeks, really in bed. It was a jolt that I needed. And what it really taught me, and as I look at adding another thing on my plate, it's like, I don't want to repeat that pattern where I'm exerting so much of my energy that I become depleted, or my resources. And so one of the things that myself and my partners talked about was, we really want to be intentional about creating something with ease and listening to our rhythms and having support and resources so we don't have to deplete our own. And that felt really important to us, because we don't want to repeat some of those patterns or to go into growing something that's going to manifest in a way that's just going to exhaust us. And my own anxiety that was sort of coming up as I embarked on this path was, shit, I don't want to give so much of myself to another thing that I'm exhausted and depleted. And so it was really important to have that intention. So as we went out to the herd and I was drawn to sit with Rudy, and I went and I sat next to him, and he came and he stood over me, and And horse sort of language and behavior, when you see a herd of horses, you'll never see all of them just lie down, because as a prey animal, they have to always have somebody on standby in case a predator comes. So when you see other horses that are lying down in the herd, what often happens is another horse will stand over them and protect them, because that's a very vulnerable position. So I was sitting next to Rudy, and he came over and he stood directly over me, sort of holding that protective space. And I felt into that, and I felt the message that he gets to be a messenger for me in a balanced state, which was kind of a full circle moment for me of, oh, I've really landed in this medicine to be able to have this exchange for him where he doesn't have to take me out, for me to really listen to the importance of, um, honoring our rhythms and not overstressing and exhausting and depleting ourselves. And I think one of the things in my work, I will say this is a core issue with my clients, is they want to move out of burnout. There's a depletion place where they're burnt out in their work, or they're burnt out in their resources, and they don't want to continue operating that way. And I understand, and I've adjusted to that. And so I stood with him, and I just really acknowledged that there was a different space, that I've balanced that in me, and he can sort of be in that balanced state with me, that protection of being held in my vulnerability. And then I could feel a little bit, to me, Rudy is, so I look at all of my horses that have a medicine, and Rudy to me will often be a medicine, because he's sort of like an emotional supporter, both with the other horses in the herd. And when people have like some emotion that they just need to have space held for in their hearts, he's there. And so I felt into that of like, where else is he supporting me? And there was a twinge of fear, and I think hurt, of having to go through something that felt really hard, of being out of balance with that overworking, and getting trampled and breaking my collarbone. It was traumatic. It was a traumatic experience, and I'm lucky that I walked away just with a broken collarbone, because it could have killed me. So it was a traumatizing experience for me, and I think that there's a part of me that still has a bit of wounding around that. And then what felt like a very powerful acknowledgement was, I think it's important for us to listen to our fears, because sometimes our fears show up so that we're reminded not to repeat patterns. So as I sat there with him and felt, this is a full circle moment, and what's the part of me that feels tender and vulnerable? And the vulnerability is, I don't want to repeat the same mistake, and I don't want to go back to where I was 4 years ago. And I don't want to repeat that learning of exhausting myself. And so I really felt the strength of that message of, keep honoring your cycles and your rhythms, and rest when you need to rest. And you're balanced in that state now. And so that was almost like a relief for the part of me that wasn't able to witness that I had shifted that, that I can be relieved. And there was almost like a message that I felt from him, that it's okay to trust yourself, that you've learned that. When we deny and ignore our intuition and our nudges and our emotions and our fears, we start to corrode the trust in ourselves, and we have to rebuild that back. So I've been rebuilding the trust in myself for the last 4 years, and it's still ongoing, right? I have to continue and consistently listen to that. There was a place when I was sitting with Rudy of really that acknowledgement of, you can trust yourself. And so there was a huge release around that. And it's safe to do that. It's safe to kind of forgive yourself for those mistakes and know that you've moved on. And I think that one of the things that often holds us back from, going for a new dream or a new business, or something that you've done in the past, is we're so afraid of repeating the same pattern that fear kind of bubbles up, and it stops us in our tracks. And I think that one of the things that I find so powerful about the horses is, they first of all bring awareness to something that maybe is percolating in us that we didn't know. So I didn't realize that this was having as much of an impact on me than I was aware of. And so sitting with Rudy was like, oh, this is kind of a big thing for me to really sit with and to feel some emotion around. So I love the horse's ability to capture those things. And it was also really important, I think I've learned with the horses, to really honor the different messages that we get, so fear is a messenger and it is an authentic emotion. Same as vulnerability. We need to listen and ask when we're feeling those things, what's the wisdom behind that? And so it's natural when we're moving forward with something that feels like a familiar path, that it's going to evoke fear because we might have held it in a way that maybe wasn't super balanced before, or we got hurt, or there was disappointment, or there was failure. And those things are all going to be stirred up. It's important for us to hold space for those things and ask again that question of, what's the wisdom? And maybe it's showing up because it's a reminder, whether it's like you need to remember to really honor your rest or your cycles, or to set your boundaries. And we have to be reminded of the lessons that we've learned so we don't repeat them. And that's the part of us that's coming up to say, remember this wisdom. And then I think what's also important about sitting with those spaces is we can have that conversation with ourselves, or we can remind ourselves that, oh, I have indeed learned that lesson. And here's how it's showing up in my life. So I can move forward knowing that I'm not the same person I was 4 years ago, or 2 years ago, or last year, or 6 months ago. And I've learned what I needed to learn. And so I'm moving forward in a fresh way, so I can trust that where I'm going, I'm carrying more wisdom with me. And so if I could offer sort of some prompts around this, because I think that, and I see this sometimes, again, in myself and in the work that I do with my clients, is there's some of these sneaky, and maybe they're not sneaky, but let's say underlying sort of stirring emotions that come up that we need to just hold space for. And our tendency sometimes is to push through it, to push through resistance or to force through it. And I sort of look at, we don't want to push through anything. We actually want to hold space for it. So if this is resonating for you, and there's things like, oh, this is like really helping me connect to something that's been there that maybe I didn't realize was there. Here's some of the ways that you can sit with that. So first of all, if you notice that you're feeling some feels, or there's stuff that's coming up as you embark on this kind of new journey that you're on, pay attention to that and just acknowledge it, that you're feeling something, and then ask, what is this? And notice what comes up, where you feel it in your body, what's the emotions, and then ask those places, what wisdom, or what's the message that you have for me? What's the information that's coming from that emotion? And then you're able to speak to those places of, again, the part of me that was afraid that I do not want to repeat that pattern again. And that's been a lifelong pattern for me. I can count a few times where I ended up in the hospital because I pushed and overworked myself, and I ignored all of the message I was getting until I ended up, it was like I had to get to the hospital before I listened. And I think I forgot that I had that pattern. And 4 years ago when I got trampled, I'm like, oh my God, I'm here again. And I forgot that I do this thing. And so now I don't do that thing anymore. I'm much more attentive to, my physical needs. And when I feel tired, I rest. It's not, the workhorse method doesn't get me to where I want to go. And it's not worth it if it's going to be a sacrifice to myself. So I need to remind the part of me that's lived through that I have wisdom. And so we can talk to that part of us and say, okay, here's where we are today. And then there's also sometimes a conversation of asking, what does the fear or the resistance need? And sometimes it needs an intention from you, or a promise that you're going to honor your rhythms, or you're not going to forget to set your boundaries, or you're going to take a day off and actually schedule it. And your fear might say, I want to actually you to schedule it in your calendar. So there's really kind of practical things that might come up, of how our fear can feel supported. And then what happens up is then we open up the space so that we're not kind of drudging these old emotions forward, or we're self-sabotaging ourselves because we're ignoring the messages that are coming internally. And then I think the last piece I want to share, I think what was really healing for me, and this is again where I love the horses, is also being able to receive the energetic support that we need. And so in that moment when I was processing these things, Rudy was just standing there and holding space. I actually have a photo of it on my Instagram. If you go to Hillary Apona on Instagram, it's in one of my posts, and he's kind of standing right over me. And I just let myself receive what he was giving to me. And so if anybody knows the the Heart Math Institute talks about us having magnetic fields that come from our heart, and horses have a massive field. And Rudy was standing almost like over me so that our hearts were meeting. And I just let myself receive what he was giving to me and the space that he was holding for me. Often when I have people come in and do things with the horses with me and have these experiences, and something like that is happening where there's a horse that is standing over and just being present with somebody, I often will just give them the invitation to just stand there and receive it. You don't have to do anything. This horse is showing up to give you an energy, and let yourself receive that. And sometimes that can be uncomfortable, for us to receive support. Or our tendency is like, oh, okay, now I'm going to walk away. And I usually invite, well, go back there and just sit in it. So I close my eyes and I let myself just be in the exchange with Rudy. And if you don't have horses, there's other places we can do that in nature. We can go to nature to get the energetic support with other people, and just be present and just breathe and allow yourself to receive, that here I'm being given an opportunity to be supported. And so I'm going to let myself receive that. And I think that, a common fear that pops up sometimes for us is that we're alone and we're holding things on our own. And so if we don't feel safe having that conversation with people, we can have it in nature. And this is also one of my practices and ritual is every morning I intentionally, when I walk my land and I'm out with my herd, and I don't just do this with my horses, I do this with the land too. I just allow myself to be present and receive the support from the mountains and the trees and the creek, and just be present to that and know I'm allowed to receive and I'm supported. And I think the place of allowing ourselves to receive is huge. And so I want to offer that invitation to you as well, that if there's a place where you just simply need to allow yourself to receive, that often provides us with what we need, the nourishment that we need to keep going on our paths and our journey. So that's what I wanted to share today on the episode. Of course, if you're listening and you're like, oh my God, I need to come and have an experience. We run a retreat center and we do retreats, both group and individual. And of course, our coaching incorporates the horses as well. So if you're wanting to go deeper, you need some support, kind of navigating through some of core pieces. A lot of the heart of our work often when we work with clients is really holding space for the things that we need to process internally. So our old wounds, the old belief systems that are holding us back, and just having some space to untangle that. So that's a big piece of what I address with people. If you feel like you need some support with that, I'd love to support you with that. You can check out our website, hillaryschneider.com, or you can simply follow us. I think people get a lot from just seeing our images of our herd and the different things that we share, or you can continue to tune in here. So I hope that resonated wherever it needed to resonate. I always sort of say to people, if there's something that really landed for you today, take it in and sit with it. So I offered some processes and inquiries and prompts. If that kind of resonated for you, take some time and really sit with it and see where it leads you. And we will see you on the next episode. Bye, everybody.